Hi, thanks for joining me. My name is Mindy Mandell. Well, in this video, I'm going to be talking about one of Plato's early dialogues. His dialogues can roughly be divided into early, middle, and late. And what most of these early dialogues have in common is that they introduce topics, but they don't really flesh them out. Their function is to get us thinking about something that we may not have thought about before, or maybe they move our thoughts in a new direction. Now, people familiar with Plato's ideas can recognize that the early dialogues drop hints as to the view of reality that Plato holds. Socrates drops riddles in these dialogues, but he doesn't solve them. To the degree he does solve them, they'll be opened up more fully in some of the later dialogues. And I would point to this to argue that the early dialogues are not evidence of Plato not yet having fully fleshed out his own view of reality. There is such a theory floating around, but I don't buy into that. I don't believe that his ideas were not yet developed when he wrote these early dialogues. I think he wrote them this way as a teaching tool. He wants us to think for ourselves, not just passively sit back and let his Socrates feed us answers. Now, I very much see this principle playing out in the dialogue Laches. On the surface, Plato seems to give us very little in this dialogue. The members of the discussion are exploring what courage is, but no answer is ever reached. If you know what to look for, though, you will discover that there's actually a lot going on here. And so this is what I want to talk about in this video. And by the end, you'll know what to look for too. So this dialogue gives us Socrates discussing with a group of military men what courage is. Our title character, Laches, is a military general who fought with Socrates and attests to Socrates' valor on the battlefield. He accompanied me in the retreat from Delium, and I assure you that if the rest had chosen to be like him, our city would be holding up her head and would not then have had such a terrible fall. Okay, so the first definition that Laches offers for courage is this. Anyone who is willing to stay at his post and face the enemy and does not run away, you may be sure, is courageous. Well, Socrates agrees that this is a good example of courage, but that's as far as he goes. This is only one situation. What about courage in the face of illness, or courage in the face of financial difficulty? And isn't courage required in the face of pleasures as well as in the face of hardships? Now, anyone who is familiar with the way that Plato developed the issue of courage in the Republic will recognize the direction that this points to. Courage is described there as a power in the soul that gives us the resolve to stay focused on wisdom, regardless of what is going on in our everyday lives. We cannot be deterred by fears, and likewise, we cannot be distracted by pleasures. In the Republic, Socrates says this of courage. The brave man preserves it both in pain and pleasure, and in desires and fears. Now let me pause for a moment here. In academic circles, there is still some controversy as to whether or not Plato was a mystic. That controversy, it's really not an issue on this channel. As far as I'm concerned, of course, Platonism is a mystic wisdom tradition. If you strip away the spirituality out of Plato's works, what's really left? There's nothing of any great significance. And so the aim of this philosophy is to know reality itself and to know our own true nature and our place in the whole. And that is what I think it means to know thyself. And that means focusing not on this physical world as though it were absolutely true and real and ultimate reality, but rather to recognize mind itself as the true reality, and to recognize this physical world as a reflection of that true world. And this is where courage comes in. living this way, choosing to stay focused on truth. It's not an easy thing to do. The choice requires a commitment to live off the beaten path. We're shunning the measures of happiness and success that most people in our communities embrace, or we're maybe reevaluating how those measures fit into our lives. We still live in the world, but we look at it all from a different perspective. Platonism has many parallels to its counterparts in the East, even though we don't wear distinctive garb or take on a title like Swami or Roshi. And so the obstacles and the challenges that they face are very much the same for us. Now, Plato doesn't open up this issue in this early dialogue, Laches, but he does point to it with the answers that the interlocutors offer. And so this first answer gives us one clue. It allows Socrates to list various situations in which a person would need courage. Now, all of these situations can be taken at the mundane level. Yet, looking at them from the perspective I just described gives it all a new level of depth. I wanted to have your view not only of brave men at arms, but also of courage in cavalry and in the entire warrior class, and of the courageous not only in war, but in the perils of the sea, and all who in disease and poverty, or again in public affairs, are courageous. And further, all who are not merely courageous against pain or fear, but doughty fighters against desires and pleasures, whether standing their ground or kicking back upon the foe. For I take it, Laches, there are courageous people in all these kinds. Now again, all of these situations can be taken at the mundane level. And at that level, this is the stuff of Hollywood movies. Sometimes we see this in action movies, in other cases it'll be human drama. And yet, I challenge you to read it again. And from the perspective of somebody like Socrates, or perhaps think of a Buddhist monk if that makes it easier for you, someone who knows the body to be but a temporary vehicle for the true self that is immortal. This person can throw himself into the world and truly live, yet do so without believing that the pleasures of the body are the best pleasures, or that the perils of this world are truly perilous. Even the threats of death did not deter Socrates from keeping his focus on reality itself. And that is true courage. It is not courage in some particular situation. It's an unwavering resolve to know the self and to be true to the self, whatever situations we find ourselves in on the physical plane. And this unwavering resolve brings us to Laches' second definition. Laches defines courage as an endurance in the soul. What faculty is it, the same whether in pleasure or in pain or in any of the things in which we said just now it was to be found, that has been singled out by the name of courage? I take it to be a certain endurance of the soul, if I am to speak of the natural quality that appears in them all. They ultimately abandon this answer as well, on the grounds that some of what passes for endurance is actually just foolish risk-taking. Now, we found before that foolish boldness and endurance are base and hurtful, and base here for millennials is in the negative sense of immoral. And so foolish boldness and endurance are base or immoral and hurtful. Quite so. But courage was admitted to be something noble. Yes, it was. Whereas now, on the contrary, we say that this base thing, foolish endurance, is courage. Apparently. Then do you think our statement is correct? On my word, Socrates, not I. So Laches gave up that answer rather easily, perhaps demonstrating a lack of endurance in his own right. But certainly true courage does include this element of endurance. It's what I before called unwavering resolve. Okay, one more definition is offered though, and this one is going to round out the discussion. Now another interlocutor, another military man named Nicias, joins in. He suggests that courage is a kind of knowledge. It is this, the knowledge of what is to be dreaded or dared, either in war or in anything else. And this opens the door to explore whether or not the virtues are a kind of knowledge. The issue is never fully explored, of course. Socrates does offer a possible objection that on this reasoning, animals such as lions are either not courageous or they must have a level of wisdom to match their courageousness. I conceive it is necessary for him who states this theory to refuse courage to any wild beast, or else to admit that a beast like a lion or a leopard or even a boar is so wise as to know what only a few men know, because it is so hard to perceive. And yet, in later dialogues such as the Meno, Socrates demonstrates the notion of recollection, that knowledge is in the soul, and that true education is the bringing out of wisdom that we inherently have access to. And so, in other places, he does suggest that virtue can be learned and is therefore a kind of knowledge. But a bigger issue arises in regards to the definition that Nicias had offered. The knowledge that Nicias spoke of is of what is to be dreaded or dared, yet fears and desires refer only to the future. Fear is caused not by past or present, but by expected evils. For fear is expectation of coming evil. However, Socrates goes on to argue, a body of knowledge must apply to the past and the present as well. And he points to some examples in medicine and law and other areas to make his case. And then he says this. Then courage is knowledge not merely of what is to be dreaded and what dared, for it comprehends goods and evils, not merely in the future, but also in the present and the past, and in any stage, like the other kinds of knowledge, apparently. So the answer you gave us, Nicias, covers only about a third part of courage, whereas our question was of what courage is as a whole. And now it appears on your own showing that courage is knowledge not merely of what is to be dreaded and what dared, but practically a knowledge concerning all goods and evils at every stage. Why is this turn of the discussion significant? It's because we would no longer be able to delineate courage from the other virtues. Courage would encompass all of them. It would become synonymous with the word virtue. Now, do you think, my excellent friend, there could be anything wanting to the virtue of a man who knew all good things, and all about their production in the present, the future, and the past, and that such a man could be lacking in temperance, or justice, or holiness, when he alone has the gift of taking due precaution in his dealings with gods and men, as regards what is to be dreaded and what is not, and of procuring good things owing to his knowledge of the right behavior towards them? I think, Socrates, there is something in what you say. Hence, what you now describe, Nicias, will not be a part, but the whole of virtue. Apparently. This causes them to drop yet another definition, not exploring in what way they hit on something true. Plato leaves it for us, the readers, to ponder this question on our own. Now, in some dialogues, such as Charmides, virtue is described as temperance. In the Republic, it is described as justice. The Phaedo uses wisdom to represent all of virtue. And here in the Laches, we see the suggestion that it is courage. So we see that although each of the virtues has its own proper role, they are not truly separate. As we mature in our education of the virtues, we recognize them coming together into a single, unified state of mind. But that's another video. Well, let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on the Laches and on the early dialogues in general. And as always, I thank you for watching. Till next time.